Okay, I've got 7:03, so I think we'll get started now. Good evening and welcome to the candidate forum for the Democratic nominee to the Maine House of Representatives, District 47, representing Chebeague Island, Long Island, and Yarmouth. Tonight's forum is organized by the Yarmouth Democratic Town Committee. My name is David Craig, and I will be moderating the forum. First, I want to recognize and thank outgoing Representative Janice Cooper, who has served the district with distinction for the past 8 years. Janice is term limited out of office, so her seat is open. 3 Democratic candidates are vying to replace her, and they are here with me tonight. They are, in alphabetical order, Heather Abbott, Art Bell, and Peter Fromuth. The forum will be conducted as follows. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an introduction and opening statement. After the introduction, we will get into the main portion of the forum. We have prepared 8 questions, which the candidates have all seen. The order of questioning for the first question, actually for the opening statement, has been randomly chosen, and the answering order will rotate after that. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question. Megan Casey is our timekeeper, and she will signal the candidates. Oops. I'm reading off a screen too. When they have 20 seconds left, and we'll ask them to stop at the 2-minute mark. Candidates, please help us keep this forum to a reasonable duration. At the conclusion of the questioning, the candidates will each be given another 2 minutes for a closing statement. Before we begin, one very important reminder. Please vote on July 14th. We recommend that you obtain an absentee ballot to avoid having to go to the polls. It's easy, and it helps us with social distancing. Details can be found on the Town of Yarmouth's website. Okay, let's get started. We randomly selected the following order for the opening statements. Art Bell will go first, followed by Peter Fromuth, and Heather Abbott will finish up, and then we'll go into our first question. So with that, Art, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Art Bell, and I love my Yarmouth community. I have served the community in many ways over the past 24 years, and now I want to take the natural next step and continue my service to Yarmouth, Chebeague, and Long Island. I have served on the school committee, CPIC, the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee, and the Merrill Library Board. I was elected to 2 3-year terms on the school board and served 6 years on the Yarmouth Senior Housing Board. I also helped found Yarmouth Arts, which is focused on me, art. Currently, I serve on the Bike Ped Committee, the Yarmouth Historical Board, and I also serve as the longtime treasurer of YCAN, Yarmouth Cares About Neighbors, where I have been for the past 10 years. As a result of my service, I am humbled and honored to have been awarded the 2017 Latchstring Award. It motivates me every day to continue my service to Yarmouth. By far and away, the most meaningful experience in Yarmouth has been raising my 3 children in this community and interacting with Yarmouth's youth. I have been a Sunday school teacher, a youth leader, and coached the Little Leagues and Colts soccer teams, and currently volunteer at Yarmouth High School to judge public policy presentations and give advice to young entrepreneurs and their teams. While the pandemic has decimated the world before, COVID-19 pandemic is unprecedented in many ways. While we're all hoping for a rapid end to this plague, let us take this moment to reflect on what it's revealed about Maine and our world. I think you will agree with me that much of what we see today is not pretty. Racial disparities have never been more prominent. The socioeconomic divide continues to grow in our challenged economy. Education and healthcare delivery has suffered. And ironically, we've got an existential threat of global warming, which will quickly return, if we don't behave, will quickly return to our old habits. So as your state representative, I will bring my voice to Augusta for equality for all Mainers, to work hard to diversify the Maine economy. I will support infrastructure that enables healthcare and education delivery, and I will continue to advocate for the meaningful and dramatic changes to protect Maine's most important natural resources. I've really enjoyed my service to Yarmouth over the years. I want to continue to use my time, energy, and experience as your state rep in Augusta. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Okay, I see you've muted, which is great. Peter, you're up next. Don't forget to unmute.
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Frommeth, and I'm a lifelong Democrat running to represent everyone in our district, whether Democrat, Republican, or Independent. The pandemic makes this election extraordinary. Rarely in our life as a state or a nation has the choice on our ballot been more stark. Do we survive and thrive as a humane democracy, or do we let division divide and disable us? As you consider your choice, I hope you will remember one thing. This is a vote about a united Maine. Yes, we have a Democratic governor and majorities in the House and Senate, but we are engulfed by challenges that call us to collaborate across the party lines and within them. For example, when a new fiscal year starts, 9 days from tonight, we can expect a plunge in sales and tax revenue. Passing a special budget to address that while protecting critical health care and other needs is best achieved by supermajorities. And that requires support across the parties. Now, I am now and have always been a liberal Democrat, but I've always been a collaborator. I work with others to bring people together. For more than a quarter century of political jobs in 3 legislatures and helping Democratic and Republican secretaries of state deal with difficult Congress, I have always looked for and often found ways to collaborate to foster common goals. On every day and in every vote, that's the spirit I will bring to Augusta as your representative in the Maine House. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now, for the last opening statement, Heather Abbott.
Good evening, fellow community members of Yarmouth, Long Island, and Chebeague. My name is Heather Abbott, and I am running for state representative because I feel passionately about doing all I can to push the tides of change towards a society where all people can live in a fair and just world. I want our children to see leaders elected to office that they can look up to, who reflect the diversity in the world around them. And when women are at the table, we bring a different perspective. In a former life, I was a massage therapist and have found that I've always been drawn to ways I can personally be a helper, whether it was assisting seniors' recovery from hip replacement surgery or comforting a new mom as her body was changing. Being a massage therapist has taught me a lot about what it means to be a good listener. Now, as a mom, I have learned firsthand what it takes to get things done. As a parent to young children, I understand the issues and difficult choices families are facing today. Whether or not to make a trip to the doctor because of how much that bill will be. How to afford the rising costs of necessary prescriptions. How much my taxes will go up this year and what impact that will have on middle-class families like mine. These are not struggles unique to my family. These are issues that are far too common and are forcing families of all ages to make impossible choices. As an active community member and volunteer in the town I love, I have learned to combine these skills to identify opportunities and create unique and valuable connections between neighbors. Part of my strength lies in being able to reach out to fellow community members and not just listen, but to hear what is being said. I don't just care about issues, I care about the people these issues impact and putting the work in to enact meaningful change. When you cast your vote for state rep, I hope you will take all of this into consideration and cast your vote for me, Heather Abbott.
Thank you, candidates, for those opening statements. And now we will go to the first question. And because of the way we're rotating the order, Peter will read the first respondent, followed by Heather, and then followed by Art. Question number 1 to Peter then. Maine will end this fiscal year in the black on June 30th. But the upcoming fiscal year will see decreased state revenues due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What specific steps, if any, would you take to protect and strengthen state services that Mainers rely on to withstand this crisis and future public health crises?
Thanks for the question. There are many things we can do. Just we can start to do anyway, even now. With unemployment so high and workers and their families losing job-based health insurance, the Maine care population is soaring. Well, we can act now to ensure that Maine care subscribers have the same access to high-quality health care as those who are privately insured. Here's an idea. Let's look at requiring nonprofit hospitals to accept Maine care patients as a condition of keeping their nonprofit status. And also, we might think about having the state purchase all Maine care medical devices and medications. Just think of the volume discounts that would be available and the elimination of the middleman. There could be some serious savings. At the same time, we must also ensure that those with commercial insurance get affordable care and medications. So, by the way, GoFundMe campaigns are no substitute for affordable health care. Now, finally, in my view, COVID has shown just how risky and precarious job-based healthcare is. And I know that this experience is going to move the needle toward wider acceptance of a public option Medicare program. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. The next answer will become from Heather Abbott.
Well, we can and should look critically at tax cuts that were made during the LePage administration so that Maine will be able to fully fund our schools, towns, and cities. We should also explore new revenue options that ensure corporations and those faring the best pay their fair share. But the problem we are facing is far too big for Maine alone to solve, and raising revenue won't be enough. State fiscal aid will be crucial. The federal government's ability to run deficits is unique and essential during times of crisis. States must balance their budgets and do not have the ability to borrow money at the levels required to respond to an economic collapse. By contrast, the federal government can borrow large sums of money with low or no interest and use those funds to stabilize the economy in moments of crisis, like now. Only the federal government can stabilize state and local budgets during an economic downturn as severe as this one. Doing so will protect jobs, ensure help is available to those who are laid off, and safeguard investments in our infrastructure and economy when they are needed most. We need Congress to provide fiscal aid to Maine to see us through this economic crisis. Legislators must advocate for federal aid to local governments, or towns will be faced with further budget cuts in the very near future, which will have detrimental effects on our communities.
Thank you, Heather. Art, same question to you.
They can't see.
So I looked at this question in two different ways. First, with regard to public health, and then secondly, with regard to the economy. With regards to public health, Maine presents a specific challenge that requires creative solutions such as telehealth, broadband expansion, and local level support. During the 8 years of the LePage administrations, roughly 100 Maine CDC jobs were cut. This left Maine vulnerable to the current coronavirus pandemic. The task force Public Health Reimagined offers a blueprint for building a responsive and cost-effective public health system in Maine, emphasizing local initiative with more united front from Augusta. From this guideline, I applaud Yarmouth for its early development of a COVID task force with epidemiologist Sharon McDonald at the helm. Through my role as treasurer of YCAN, I have seen firsthand how our community has once again risen to the occasion and supported our neighbors. As your state rep, I will continue to create solutions that support these forward-thinking public health organizations at both the state and the community level. And with regard to the economy, now more than ever, Maine needs to consider expanding our economy beyond the tourism and hospitality industries. I am excited about the opportunities like the Rue Institute, which will promise to educate our workforces and support future tech businesses in Maine. And similarly, I support reinforcing Maine's investment in infrastructure. Just yesterday, I cast my ballot and voted in favor of the 2 bond issues on the current ballot funding broadband and transportation investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. We will now move to the second question, and this one will be first addressed by Heather. What is your plan to address the high level of unemployment in Maine due to the pandemic?
The most challenging aspect of addressing this issue will be maintaining the delicate balance between protecting public health and restarting the economy. We are still in the middle of completely uncharted territory. There are so many variables at play based on where we will be in response to the rate of hospitalizations due to community spread of COVID-19. This will require us to constantly reassess our plans based on the current data and recommendations from public health experts. We also need to take notice of the fact that unemployment has disproportionately impacted women and people of color. A plan to tackle unemployment must center those groups if we want to truly be successful at repairing our high levels of unemployment. In the meantime, we should explore expanding job training programs for industries like manufacturing and healthcare. These fields are struggling to fill positions and are areas that will weather the pandemic. We should also explore creating incentives such as tax credits and student loan forgiveness to attract these industries and professionals to Maine and ensure that they remain here.
Thank you, Heather. Art, question goes to you.
Thank you. Maine has been hard hit by the COVID pandemic due to the age of our population and our dependence on the tourism and transportation industries. This highlights our need for a task force that focuses on diversifying Maine's economy. As a representative in House Seat 47, I would love to participate on the Health and Human Services Committee in Augusta, and here are some of my thoughts. As people have been sent home from offices, the pandemic has highlighted new opportunities for people to work from home. In the coming years, I anticipate a migration from cities and urban areas to places like Maine. We need to support this movement with things like the expansion of broadband and increased housing accessibility. I also support the development of sustainable uses of Maine's many natural resources. For example, in the past year, I have been excited by the explosion of kelp and seaweed farming, the concept of the farming the ocean idea. Our waters are ideal for kelp, seaweed, and other plant and shellfish aquaculture. These products not only reduce CO2 and acidification in the ocean, but they benefit the climate. It also provides an alternative for lobstermen who can fish during the summer and then possibly farm during the winter. And lastly, I again am excited by the Rue Institute, which teaches the skills needed to be competitive for the new tech-based economy. Education in general is going to be essential to building a vibrant and successful economy. I encourage other innovations such as these and look forward to developing creative approaches to solving Maine's employment problems on committees in Augusta.
Thank you, Art. Peter, question to you.
Well, I think we can and should act now on several fronts. First, keep us working. For goodness sake, most Mainers work for or are small businesses, and it's cheaper to keep these businesses alive than rebuild them. Rebuild them while Maine pays unemployment and food stamps and welfare, and Maine Care's subscriber rolls spike. Second, wanting to keep our cities and towns functioning vibrantly is critical. If we lose municipal employees, we have some serious problems. How do we pay for it? Well, the $1.25 billion federal block grant currently in Maine to help Mainers, Maine businesses, Maine institutions deal with COVID-related injury of all kinds and types of economic damages. These funds should be available for both of these purposes and probably will be. Third, For out-of-work Mainers who are unlikely to return on an early schedule to full employment, we really need extended federal unemployment insurance. And it's not too early now to think about what I call eco-employment projects with a long-term return to Maine's economy and environment. For example, public-private investment for utility-scale wind and solar, or infrastructure for large-scale aquafarming, or broadband extension to rural communities, possibly using the model employed currently by our own Long Island, which is not quite there, but is making considerable progress in this direction. And here's another idea. The film industry, as many people know, is pretty much fleeing Hollywood in search of cheaper and with COVID-19, safer places to film. Well, here's a large group of people who need to spend large amounts of money on everything from sewing costumes to set designs to food. They'll want some tax relief, and goodness knows Maine needs commerce. There may be something of real value to both sides here. In any event, this is a time when we need creativity and aggressiveness. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, on to question number 3, and this time Art will be starting. Maine is not immune from police bias and violence. Maine disproportionately incarcerates a larger number of people of color, and Maine has a gap in education achievement between white students and students of color. What specific steps will you take to address systemic racism in Maine?
No matter where you are on this journey, it takes courage to question your own actions and biases. As a person of faith, I am called to love my neighbor as myself. We cannot ignore that people of color are more likely to be killed by police, to face economic and healthcare disparities, and to suffer from climate-fueled disasters. It is no longer enough to say, I am not a racist. I strongly believe that the force behind the current Black Lives Matter movement is different this time. This is illustrated by the 15-year-old girls in Nashville who are organizing citywide protests. And I was proud to stand on Main Street with many of the people in little old Yarmouth, a predominantly white community, as we showed our support on several occasions over the past few weeks. Just like this nationwide movement, our neighbor, South Portland, is reallocating police funding to create a human rights commission, specifically targeting racial disparities in arrests and criminal summonses. We should be looking for opportunities such as this in all of Maine's communities. It is clear that racism is pervasive to even our most progressive-minded communities. We in Maine must advocate for new opportunities to educate on systemic racism in our public institutions and to continue the dialogue that is louder now than ever. When she came to speak in Maine last year, Alicia Garza, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, said the following: Maine can be a leader in showing the rest of the country how to be a real hero, a hero that is courageous enough to dismantle what is organizing the structures in our society.
Thank you, Art. Peter, it's your turn to answer.
Well, I think first of all, we need to recognize that there has been bias-based violence by police against Black people since before the founding of the Republic. Yet today, there is no denying that the murder of George Floyd during the pandemic has exposed harsh realities in a way that has forced our nation to reckon with them in a manner that's very unusual. It takes us back to the civil rights period, but is more diverse than that. Now, most police that I have known as a public defender and as a citizen want to serve the community the best they can. But the police don't come from outer space, but from our own white-dominated culture and institutions, and the biases that are still embedded there. So let me mention just a few starting steps. For law enforcement, I would like to see state action to increase police liability for misconduct, I want to see firings or demotions for bias-based police actions and reversal of the militarization of police tactics. I think COVID also exposes some very harsh inequalities for state government too. For example, schools in low-income neighborhoods of all races often have few or no computers or other meaningful ways to educate their kids during school shutdowns. And we need more and better access to higher education and to high skills training for higher incomes. Finally, let's act on the Permanent Commission's many proposals, from directing more CARES funding to minority populations that have been hit especially hard, to police incident reporting and accountability measures. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Heather, your time up.
Well, we must center the voices of those who are routinely dismissed if we want to move forward to a place of justice. We need to make sure that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are a part of the conversation, since they're the ones most affected by policy intended to address this issue. To do this, we need to follow the lead of the newly established Permanent Commission on Race here in Maine. We need to see Black history and the history of systemic injustice taught in all Maine schools. Our students need exposure to cultural diversity and all of our country's true history, because representation matters. We need a task force that will work to reimagine community policing in Maine. Anti-racism training needs to be a part of basic mandatory training for all police departments. Maine communities need tools, not just to police, but also to offer crisis intervention and other supports. Beyond this, we need to move towards a restorative justice model for Maine children and teens. The focus should not be on incarcerating youth, but enrolling them in programs that offer both financial and academic support. We need to redistribute more of our budget towards social services, youth services, housing, education, and other community resources that will improve crime rates and community interaction with police. The COVID-19 crisis has shed an important light on the racial disparities throughout our state, and I am hopeful that we can grasp this opportunity for long overdue change.
Thank you, Heather. All right, we'll move on to question number 4, and this one will be answered first by Peter. Reproductive justice describes the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Maine law provides some of the strongest protections supporting reproductive justice for women. However, access to reproductive health care is still a problem in Maine. What is your plan to fight for reproductive justice at the state level, especially given the potential loss of protections at the federal level?
In an historic step, last June, Maine became, I think, only the second state in the country to allow advanced practice clinicians, people like physician's assistants, RNs, osteopaths, to provide abortion medication and in-clinic services, as many states were going in the opposite direction and tightening restrictions. Access to reproductive health care for women, especially in rural Maine, improved dramatically because most Maine counties had no clinics providing abortion. Nearly 1/2 of Maine women have very limited access. Well, the Trump administration wasn't done with Maine. As an end run, it tried reversing the expansion of access by ruling that clinics getting Title X money must physically separate facilities providing abortions from facilities providing all other services. Staff couldn't even tell a woman where to get a safe abortion. Well, for 50 years, the federal Title X program has supported Maine family planning and a wide range of health care to over thousands and thousands of other low-income Mainers. So in fact, these clinics were the only low-cost healthcare providers in some communities. Well, rather than ignore its ethical duty to advise patients, Maine Family Planning withdrew from the program. But because they operate on tiny margins, this will force closure of 11 out of 15 family planning clinics statewide, leaving Mainers with no health care at all. Many Mainers. A Sarah Gideon bill would replace the lost $2 million in federal money with state money. I will push hard for that bill.
Thank you, Peter. Heather, you're next.
The first major problem women face as our nation chips away at our reproductive rights is a distinct lack of equal representation in government. I am here to change that. We need more women in office with a seat at the table where decisions are being made on our behalf. Last session, our legislature made a great progress to address equity of access to reproductive health care. Legislators worked to require Maine Care to cover the full range of reproductive health care options. If I had been in office, I would have supported this legislation. As a legislator, I will continue to support measures that protect a woman's right to make personal decisions with her medical provider. As a legislator, I will work to support reproductive justice. I will fully work to protect Maine laws that ensure safe legal access to reproductive health care, defeat bills designed to restrict people's ability to make their own healthcare decisions, support amending the Maine Constitution to ensure full protections for all people by including reproductive freedom and LGBTQ+ equality, decriminalize abortion in Maine law, support and fund the Permanent Commission on Race, support criminal justice reforms. I look forward to fighting for all of this and more as a legislator.
Thank you, Heather. And Art, your turn to finish up on this question.
Thank you. As a start, we need to win back the White House and the Senate. And then we can begin to realign the Supreme Court to position it to strengthen women's rights. Convenience and stigma are the major barriers to reproductive justice. We must support organizations such as the Maine Alliance for Reproductive Freedom and Planned Parenthood to increase access for women across the state. And again, I want to acknowledge the health disparities that exist in our rural state. This applies not only to reproductive rights, but also to the delivery of all health care. The pandemic has served as a catalyst for telemedicine in Maine, which has increased access for patients living in rural and island communities or working full-time. I support broadening the insurance coverage and access to telehealth delivery, which can reduce barriers for much of Maine's population. As it pertains to reproductive health, increasing access to providers for residents in every corner of Maine promises to support reproductive justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. We move on now to question number 5. This will be answered first by Heather. What is your plan to help Maine mitigate climate change and promote alternative energy to ensure a better future for our children and grandchildren?
While raising 3 young children, I have been chairperson of Yarmouth's Committee for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability and digital coordinator for Yarmouth Schools PTO. Working to ensure a better today and tomorrow for our children is something I take very seriously. Governor Mills has made great strides through the Maine Climate Council, but we must go beyond the council goals to have an equitable transition to clean energy. The Green New Deal was passed by our legislature last session, was watered down, and excluded renewable energy requirements. Maine still has an opportunity to pave the way by taking part in regional policy to enact stronger Green New Deal values. These values aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, which also addresses societal problems like economic inequality and racial injustice. As we are seeing economic and racial disparities being highlighted throughout the COVID crisis, climate change will only worsen these inequities in our communities unless we act now. The Green New Deal calls on the federal government to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, create high-paying jobs, ensure that clean air, clean water, and healthy food are basic human rights. If the United States isn't going to take a leading role in this, we must see that Maine does.
Thank you, Heather. Art, it is now your turn.
Addressing climate change was the driving factor in my decision to run for this office. Climate change is real, and Maine is already experiencing the effects. The Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on Earth. The threat to our planet is personal to me, just as it is to our young friends at Yarmouth High School. I had the privilege to participate in the student climate strike last fall with the students of Yarmouth High. I heard a young woman stand up before her classmates and pronounce that she would not want to bring children into our world that's racked by climate crisis. Those words have haunted me ever since. I want my legacy to be empowering these and future generations to address the required change now. At the state level, we have made some progress, especially in fostering renewable energy sources, and it's been not enough though. I plan to support and advocate for bold action like those included in the Green New Deal. We also need to do everything we can to encourage people to act locally. Here's what I've done. I have successfully worked to install 128 solar panels on the roof of First Parish Church on Main Street. I have helped establish the Royal River Alliance, which is looking into restoring the Royal River watershed, the second largest river flowing into Casco Bay. I continue to advocate for alternative transportation and healthy lifestyles. I've had a blast working on the Bike Ped Committee here in town and the Rails to Trails initiative. The dream for me would be to have a bike path that connects Portland in the northern suburbs along the Atlantic and St. Lawrence rail corridor. This has been known to be a great economic driver for communities around the country, a win-win. Let's not forget that tackling climate change is not charity. It's critical for our economy. Maine is dependent upon the bounty of the sea, which every year becomes less bountiful. And our winter tourism industry depends on the snow that comes less frequently. And our forests are being decimated by insects and diseases that would not have survived in our previous colder winters. I will work hard to reinforce the recommendations of Governor Mills's Climate Council. And if elected, I would like to be appointed to the Environmental and Natural Resources Committee, where I can be positioned to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Okay, Peter, your turn to answer this question.
More than any other issue, this is what drove me to run for the legislature. I say it's because I can't simply watch our kids inherit the climate emergency that my own generation helped create. Now, dramatic progress is possible. Let me just talk about 4 areas very quickly. First, utility scale solar. We need a law to remove the 5 megawatt cap on community solar projects that is holding back the much greater expansion of solar use in Maine. It would immediately make solar more accessible, more affordable to more people. And it would be based upon a model already in use in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Illinois, California, and many other places. It's a win-win. Wind. Offshore, the Aquaventus project off Monhegan is going well. Wind has a huge potential. The UK is very far ahead. We have quite a bit to learn, but we have an opportunity to move quickly with our coastline. Onshore, ridge tops close to the grid are good opportunities for wind. I would like to pursue what's called blue carbon, the use of kelp and eelgrass for blue carbon sequestration. It actually is 20 times more effective at sequestration than trees. And we have a huge area for development that is out of the way of fisheries. Finally, I would just comment on this, that marine research labs from California to Maine have confirmed this now for 4 or 5 years. It is time for states to get engaged in developing this. Lastly, electric vehicles. Transportation is our largest contribution to greenhouse gas. And we need to convert EVs but that won't happen without fast charging stations, and we have next to none. We have to be creative and get those built. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. We move now to question number 6, which will be started with an answer from Art. The Mills administration and the 129th legislature have increased funding to Maine pre-K through 12 schools to 51%. But Maine state government has not yet fully funded K through 12 education at 55%, as required by the 2003 law passed by referendum. What specific steps, if any, would you take to increase funding the public schools in Yarmouth, Chebeague, and Long Island?
Yarmouth has a long history of community commitment to public education, and it has borne fruit in the award-winning school system that we are blessed with. And we managed to achieve this excellence while spending significantly less per pupil than our peers in Cumberland, Falmouth, and Cape Elizabeth. We have managed to do this primarily with funding from local taxes. I recognize our privilege in Yarmouth to compensate for government shortages, but we need to support our less affluent communities who cannot bridge this gap. I will advocate for the full 55%, the amount that voters have demanded since 2003. State aid to education is the largest single line item in the current state budget and will be facing a lot of scrutiny and revenue shortfalls caused by the unprecedented pandemic. I pledge to stand fast to support education funding. We cannot make short-term decisions that will harm our children in the long run. We need to prepare this generation to be the future of Maine. A rising tide floats all boats. If we can get the Maine economy back on solid ground, we can commit to 55%. In the meantime, education will be at the top of my list of priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Peter, your turn.
As I've said earlier, I think job one for the next legislature must be to help Mainers, many of whom are struggling without jobs, to get back on their feet after the body blow to our economy of COVID-19. Now, the state's overall contribution to the educational budget, between 51.7 and about 52%, per the House Education Committee last week, has recovered dramatically since the 2008 recession, when it was in the 40% range. Governor Mills, I'm happy to say, is on record promising to continue the increase at 1% per year until we achieve the full 55% as required by law. At this stage, I believe that goal is still very feasible, even with the impact of COVID-19, both extremely important to me as a parent and a taxpayer. I will press the governor to keep her promise. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And the final answer to this question will be from Heather Abbott.
For years, Maine has fallen short on its commitments to fund public schools and make robust investments in our local communities. Maine Center for Economic Policy has a great analysis on this. We must rebuild state revenues lost to income tax cuts enacted under former Governor Paul LePage. Those tax cuts primarily benefit the wealthiest Maine households and will cost the state more than $860 million this budget cycle. Without recouping any of the revenue lost to these tax cuts, we will be unable to fully fund Maine schools, towns, and cities. The state has continually struggled because of continued choices to prioritize tax cuts for the wealthiest. Lawmakers can close this gap by enacting sensible and fair revenue-raising policies. On average, the top 1% of Maine households pay less on their income in state and local taxes than people who earn less. By fixing our out-of-balance tax code, we can fund the core investments that put families and our economy on an upward trajectory. We are likely entering our country's next Great Recession or even depression. Those who can afford to pay their fair share should.
Thank you, Heather. We'll now move on to the next question. This will be answered first by Peter. According to the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, the death rate due to gun use is higher in Maine than in New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and 6 other states. And the suicide rate in Maine is 30% above the national average for people aged 20 to 24, with firearms accounting for more than 50% of suicide deaths. What is your plan to address gun violence and firearm deaths in Maine?
Let me try that again. I was not unmuted.
Yes.
You know,
okay.
Dave, the situation is even worse than that. The Maine teen suicide rate is the 6th highest in the United States. This has been a lifelong passion of mine, and I was honored by the support of the Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Maine has not, in fact, adopted significant gun safety measures in a generation. And last year, 11 of the 12 bills we worked on failed. This is paradoxical for me. I mean, it occurs despite repeated state and national polls that show strong majorities for major reforms among gun owners and non-owners, among both people in both congressional districts. So why don't legislators get together on this and vote the way their constituents want? I think it's time for a new approach. I think it's time to cultivate relationships with local influencers like pediatricians, trauma surgeons, others with a painful, intimate connection with a tragedy of gun violence, and people with local community standing that can help generate support for reforms. Now, in terms of where I'd start, I guess I'd start modestly to try to get some momentum. I'd start by obvious things, like, for example, a law banning guns from pre-K schools. Why should that be difficult? And it's a regulation that should be a law. Law allowing councils to ban guns from town official meetings. Why should that be difficult? Universal background checks. Getting back to the town councils, I mean, the fact is, if these are occasions for free and open discussion. If there's guns lying across the chairs, how many people, probably a lot of them, are going to feel intimidated? So it's time for a new approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Heather, your response?
Last session, our legislature unfortunately failed to pass every single sensible gun law put before them. It is my understanding that this administration will not be supportive of important legislation such as a red flag law, universal background checks, gun licensing, gun buybacks, and waiting periods. These are evidence-based reforms that we know would be effective, and yet here we are. We will need to work on building relationships and partnerships with public health organizations in Maine who can help us support gun reform. Gun violence and suicide by guns is a public health crisis. With the support of public health organizations together, we may be able to make some progress in preventing gun violence. For the next session, I would propose that every firearm sale comes with these 3 things. Every firearm sale should be accompanied by an appropriate locking device and information on how to properly use that locking device. Firearm purchases should also come with information on how to safely store that firearm. Lastly, every purchase of a firearm should come with suicide prevention hotline contact information. This simple act has the potential to get help into the hands of those that truly need it before it's too late. Again, gun violence and suicide by guns is a public health crisis. We need to start with these incentives as gun-safe practices while we continue to forge relationships necessary to enact gun legislation.
Thank you, Heather. Art, your answer.
Thank you. Maine has a strong tradition of gun ownership. In fact, more than 50% of the homes in Maine have guns. Gun legislation, as Heather has just said, is a public health issue, particularly in Maine, where firearms kill people in 3 different ways, as it's been elaborated: suicide, domestic violence, and accidents by children. The fact that we do not have the level of street crime that urban states do does not mean that we should not take action. Rather, it means that tightening access to firearms should be tailored to those who misuse them, the mentally and unstable people who will likely harm themselves, spouses and others who have shown violence toward their partners, and households who fail to safely store their firearms out of the reach of children. Gun legislation should reflect these concerns. I want to reiterate the need for broadening telehealth access, especially as it serves mental health. We need to restrict access to guns for individuals with a history of abusive behavior or mental illness. And we need to support organizations like the Maine Gun Safety Coalition, which offers safety training programs, dispenses free trigger locks, and presents 4 fundamental safety rules for all households to follow. And finally, I want to continue the good work of Town Councilor Tim Shannon for championing the annual Gun Give Back program locally, and for Janice Cooper for taking a proactive approach in Augusta over the years, advocating for gun safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. We have made it all the way to our final question. And question number 8 will be answered first by Heather. Maine law requires that state government sends 5% of its annual revenues back to cities and towns every year. But both the Baldacci and LePage administrations reduced this program, known as municipal revenue sharing. This means that Yarmouth, Long Island, and Chebeague Island property taxpayers have had to shoulder more of the burden in recent years, which has driven up their property taxes. While municipal revenue sharing increased in the last biennial budget, it is still not at the level it was in 2010 when Governor LePage took office. What will you do in Augusta to increase revenue sharing and/or give relief to struggling property taxpayers?
Maine's towns and cities provide valuable public services that support families and small businesses. Policy decisions in Maine that led to underfunded schools, difficulty accessing healthcare, and reduced community investments and services have kept Mainers down and prevented growth of our economy. Cuts to municipal revenue sharing have put a lot of pressure on local communities. To make up for the shortfall, they have had to increase property taxes, cut services, and sometimes both. We can put an end to continued shortfalls that put our students, teachers, and communities further behind. We must fix our tax code so we can invest that money in things that support thriving communities and a strong economy. We should reinstate tax increases on wealthier residents and push that revenue back into communities and their economies. We must also address the structural barriers that keep people of color from having an equal opportunity to contribute and prosper. Failure to do this has had a detrimental effect on all of us. We can empower Maine families to grow an inclusive economy with smart investments in schools, our workforce, healthcare, and our communities, while ensuring that all Mainers, regardless of their race, where they live, or their family's wealth, can benefit from a strong economy. Improving Maine's tax code to support working families and close loopholes will give us the funding we need to build a stronger future for Maine.
Thank you, Heather. Art?
Yes.
Response.
In light of the current pandemic, it's unrealistic to expect more money to come from the state in the next few years. To keep the burden from falling on the backs of our residential taxpayer, we must take steps to broaden the commercial tax base. We must attract new businesses via economic development programs utilizing tax incentive tools like TIFs. These encourage businesses to locate in Yarmouth, which reduces the pressure on residential property taxpayers. We need to look critically at our commercial property revenue. As a resident of Cousins Island for the past 24 years, I have seen firsthand how the Wyman Station Power Plant has diminished its contribution to the tax base of Yarmouth. That property should be creatively repurposed to once again share the tax burden in our community. And I also applaud our town council for establishing the STAY program, the Senior Tax Assistance Program, that gives relief to our seniors so that they can stay in their homes and age gracefully. In Augusta, I urge broadening the base of what is taxable. Currently, there is a host of properties and services that are tax exempt. We must explore where we can find new sources of tax revenue. Maine is in a good position to borrow money through the greater use of bonds to get us through this crisis. Rates are favorable and our bond rating is high, resulting in low-cost financing. At the same time, we need to be fiscally prudent and work hard to find ways to trim non-essential spending. This new revenue could help fund some of the other initiatives that I've put forward, reinforcing education, reducing barriers to healthcare, and supporting Maine's natural resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. And Peter, the final answer goes to you.
So I certainly would work to get municipal revenue sharing back to 5%. I believe LePage tried to eliminate it altogether, and the legislature saved the program but reduced it to 2.5%. Now it's very significant that Mills, the Governor Mills, and legislature have been pushing to get it back to 5%, and I think this biennium we're at 3.5%. And the current year, I think we're at 4.5%. So we're doing quite well. However, property taxes are suffocating for an awfully large number of people. And we've got to explore ways to offset the burden that they impose. And yes, certainly, I would like to see more commercial development. Our Economic Development Advisory Board is very engaged in seeking ways to do that and has had some success. I'd like to see it, especially in infill areas where we could have wholly consistent commercial development consistent with existing architecture. Also, I think it's noteworthy that we're forcing many of our retired people to leave the town where they grew up, where they raised kids, where they want to stay, because they simply cannot afford to stay here. They can't pay the property taxes. For example, even though the homestead exemption increase from 20 to 25,000 was welcome, it was a modest help, as is stay. We need to look further at what other states are doing to relieve the burden on retired and elderly. New York State, for example, uses something called the Enhanced STAR program. The eligibility for that is 65 and over, income not exceeding a certain amount. And the average tax break is over $1,400. Well, on a limited fixed income, those kinds of programs that's serious money. I think we need to look around at what others are doing and pursue this much more aggressively. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Well, that concludes the question portion of the forum. We'll now have closing statements from each of the candidates. By the wonder of mathematics, the number of questions, the number of candidates, we end up with the exact same order as the opening statements. So we'll go with Art, then Peter, and then Heather with your 2-minute closing statements. Art?
Thank you. And thank you, David, and the whole Yarmouth Dem team for putting this together. I have treasured my service over the past 24 years to the town of Yarmouth, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to serve as a state representative. Again, the pandemic has given me time to pause and to think about Maine's future. We must take care of our treasured natural resources and find ways to sustain them and put them to work in unique and sustainable ways. We must support the future of our state by reinforcing education, infrastructure, and employment opportunities. And finally, and arguably most importantly, we must embrace our population, all ages, sexualities, races, ethnicities. It is not enough to say that I am not a racist. We must educate ourselves and commit to ending all elements of conscious and unconscious racism that's embedded in our lives. The horrible pandemic has highlighted these fundamental flaws in our society. Great challenges can lead to great change in thinking and action. Just like FDR's New Deal reset our country's moral compass back in the Great Depression in the 1930s, I believe we need to reset our compass again. Now is the time to address these fundamental issues, and I want to represent our little corner of America as a leading example to our nation and the world. If we can do these things, we might be able to reclaim the slogan, "As Maine goes, so goes the nation." I want to be your state representative in Augusta, representing Yarmouth, Chebeague, and Long Island. I have thoroughly enjoyed my years of service to Yarmouth. I believe I have the time, the energy, and the experience to represent Yarmouth, Chebeague, and Long Island in Augusta. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Peter, your turn.
Well, thanks to the Yarmouth Democrats for hosting this very valuable forum, and to all of you for attending. Before I start, I just want to note that we're holding this election in a way that has a place in Maine history. It is, after all, the first year, I believe, the first year for a ranked choice election at the state legislative level. And as someone involved in that effort, it's an exciting moment. And I'm really delighted to be part of it. Now, there are three of us here, so I owe it to you to explain why me. But before the hard sell, actually, let me just say that there were no questions tonight specifically about seniors. And the fact is that we rely on them as coaches and community leaders and counselors and philanthropists. And if I go to Augusta, an unwavering concern for their welfare will go with me. Now, I'm also going to bring years of legislative experience, drafting bills and amendments, counting noses, getting important things adopted. I'll bring negotiation skills that have helped bring, say, the Russians on board to US initiatives, or Republican legislators to support an Alaskan telemedicine network that I drafted and is still in use. I'm going to bring people skills that have helped avoid needless confrontation and move a proposal to reality more than a few times. I'll bring my passion for mitigating climate change and reforming healthcare and improving gun safety. Most of all, I'm going to bring my love for Maine. It started here all those summers on Long Island when I was a very, very small kid. And it's brought me back as an adult. So I thank you for being part of this, and I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Peter. And the final closing statement comes from Heather Abbott.
Well, thank you for your time and consideration tonight. Thank you to Yarmouth Dems for organizing this forum. And thank you to Peter and Art for your thoughtful contributions. Most of all, thank you to everyone who tuned in to participate in this process and for feeling a responsibility to do so. I hope I have earned your vote tonight. While my husband and children were all born here, I have chosen to make Yarmouth my home because I love and cherish all the things that make Yarmouth, Chebeague, and Long Island the unique places we call home. I look forward to many more years as an engaged Mainer. In the immediate future, I look forward to hearing from you. I'm here, I'm dedicated, and I'm determined to keep learning more and more every day. I want to hear from you, and I want to keep making our community the best place to live for our children, for you, for our parents, and our grandparents. You can contact me through my webpage, which is abbottforme.com, or by finding me right here on Facebook at abbottforme. And I want you to know we are in this together. I really feel that way. And I look forward to the opportunity to represent you and our district in Augusta. Your vote for me brings us one step further together.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you all candidates for a very interesting forum, excellent answers to the questions. We will be well represented in Augusta come next fall. A reminder to our viewers, primary election day is July 14th. We encourage you to request an absentee ballot to help with social distancing. Information about the election and the absentee ballot request is located on the Town of Yarmouth's website. Thank you for viewing. Make sure you vote and stay safe. Good night.